All right.
All right.
Here you
All
go.
right.
Perfect.
All right. All right. Terrific. All right. So let me go ahead and share the application. The presentation is going to get better. Just hang on here for 1 second. All right. All right. So I'll just ask again. You can see the slide.
Yep. All set.
All right. All right. Thanks, everybody. All right. So now is going to be the official start of the presentation. So thanks again for joining us. We're going to be talking about Google Scholar primarily, and to a lesser extent, advanced Google search, and specifically within the context of our Tutor Symposium today. I'm really excited to be here. This is a topic that I have covered in various settings and contexts here at the college. Certainly when we do library instruction, in any number of sort of faculty focused presentations and workshops, this is all content that I've had an opportunity to cover. I've presented some of this information when collaborating with my colleagues in some of these other types of activities that I just mentioned. But this is the first time specifically that I've had an opportunity to talk about Google Scholar and, again, to a lesser extent, advanced Google search in the context specifically of tutoring. And I would say that this is, I think, a great forum for this topic based on what tutors do to work with students, and also for their own benefit in finding resources to provide to students directly. So in that regard, very excited about this context. My name is Michael Moore, and here's my contact information, and I'll put it again at the end of the presentation. So Google Scholar was built on the idea specifically that access to information should be universally available. And this is a theme that's going to come up throughout the presentation today. I just sort of want to front load that piece because I do think there's a couple of, I think, conceptions about Google that prevent people from focusing on it as an academic tool. And certainly later we'll sort of contrast, standard Google products or other Google products from Google Scholar. But I do think it's important to sort of front load the nature of Google Scholar as something that is meant to democratize access to education. It's certainly, very much central to the mission, the purpose of Google Scholar in a way that really distinguishes it from other search products of Google, actually. So we're going to be focusing here on very practical strategies to help both tutors and students locate, as you can see here, free high quality research and learning materials that would support any academic pathway. So a couple of things just to sort of add a little bit more gloss to this. I think on the one hand, these sort of tips that I'm going to show you today would be very useful to, again, locate materials for yourselves that you would want to use in working with students and tutoring students. Secondly, I think that these are good search techniques and good search tools that would really help really any of us teach students how to find information on their own. So certainly on the one hand, students make their way to learning resources, to the library, whether in person, and of course these days it tends to be virtual almost exclusively, to find help with research, to get assistance with research. But I also do think that tutors have an opportunity in practical terms to help students with research on a daily basis. And so this is such an easy tool to use. I'm hopeful that you'll find it of value in your daily work with students. So the agenda for today, we're going to start with just a background and overview of Google Scholar, talk a little bit about its origin story, going back to the point earlier about what sort of separates and distinguishes Google Scholar from other Google products. It's just as excellent as other Google products, but again, it has a very specific focus and application that I think distinguishes it for academic use, just beyond the name of the product, but also just in terms of its origin and its central underlying mission. Against that background, second, we're going to talk about some use cases for Google Scholar beyond the obvious, which is to find information. Then third, we're going to talk about how to use Google Scholar, and I'm going to go into some specific examples and run some searches. All right, and then talk last about Google and OER, which is Open Educational Resources. I should say regarding point 4, the fourth point here, that I've had an opportunity to collaborate on a lot of open educational resources initiatives here at the college. And if anything, I think that Google Scholar and advanced Google search, for that matter, are uniquely suitable for open educational resources type applications. And so that's something that I'm actually going to spend a little bit of extra time focusing on than I might otherwise. But I just sort of wanted to let you know, on the one hand, that open educational resources is something that I happen to do a lot of work with. So if any of you attending or listening to this presentation have any questions about OER, or again, open educational resources, please feel free to reach out at any time. And I would be happy to have a conversation about those topics specifically as well. So we're going to go ahead and begin. I put here, it's essential to have coffee, pen, notebook, and more coffee. Always more coffee. All right. So the background and overview. So as I mentioned just a moment ago, I think that really Google Scholar is a unique product. On the one hand, it is central to the daily set of tools used by students and academics and information professionals every day. So it's not an obscure product by any means, but certainly against the background of Google's other products, it's, I don't think, as widely known or utilized. And I've seen some commentators point out that people sometimes will run a search for something on Google and sort of randomly get search results back that would point them to Google Scholar, but that they're not necessarily starting off in Google Scholar. So this presentation is going to focus on distinguishing Google from Google Scholar generally, and provide an opportunity for us to sort of see its unique features and applications. So I start off just thinking about Google in the classroom and for purposes of student projects and student research. And I suspect this is something that comes up in tutoring sessions. And anecdotally, I've spent time in the tutoring lab here and there, especially for project learning exercises. And this is, of course, all pre-pandemic. So for what it's worth, I remember spending several hours, a couple afternoons in the tutoring lab at the Kendall campus, and hearing from more than one student that they, were not supposed to use Google to find sources. And certainly any of us who have worked in the library are familiar with this. Apart from our own feelings about using Google or other internet sources, the reality of it is that a lot of assignments that have a research component carry with them sort of a prohibition against using, quote, Google. So I just sort of want to start off when I say that Google Scholar is, obviously a Google product, but we're talking, of course, about leveraging it to find academic sources. So on the one hand, I just point that out because some students do have, I would say, less an apprehension, but more certainly a hesitation about using Google for class assignments if they have some sort of requirement that they find, quote, academic sources as opposed to just, random websites or Wikipedia or anything else that they would just find, on the internet, generally speaking. So I always point out that Google Scholar is different from Google, regular Google, we'll call it, in the sense that it is a corpus of academic research. And of course, one of the unique attributes of Google Scholar is that you are using a familiar search tool with a lot of the same, or really all of the same functionality of Google, but you're searching within a corpus of academic research. And then you'll see, as we get into this a little bit more, that there's a lot of amazing value adds. And I have had very few students, this is, again, a fairly large sample size for me, but still anecdotal evidence of this, to say that when students use Google Scholar to do academic research for their classes, having started off, let's say, initially working in the catalog or searching, in a particular database, I would say almost invariably they really enjoy the experience of using Google Scholar. So a lot of students, almost every student I've ever talked to about Google Scholar really likes it. So I'm always happy to recommend it, and I'm always excited to share some of these features with people. In terms of Google Scholar's origin story, the background of it, Anurag Ancharya is really, I'd say that he's credited alternatively as, the co-founder, key inventor, other similar terms. And this is really it was and is remains sort of an enduring part of his enduring legacy at Google. And the tool was created really just to empower researchers. I mentioned earlier that Google Scholar is part of the daily workflow and experience of students and academics and information professionals around the world. And its origin really does speak to that, and in particular starts off, I think, with the student. And so there's a great article that some of these quotes you'll see are pulled from that appeared in Wired magazine, and it talks about sort of the idea for Google Scholar was born. You have to go back to 1987 at the Indian Institute of Technology, where Ancharia was then a student, and he was struck by the fact that it was very difficult for students to get a hold of relevant scholarly materials. And as he points out in this one article I just mentioned, for Indian scholars, it was nearly impossible. And so he shares in his experience that if you knew that an article existed, so this would be the equivalent of what some of us librarians would think of as a known item search, that you would write letters, letters to track it down. So, so this left him, and this is quoting from this great article, was haunted by the realization that the great minds were deprived of inspiration. So, I do think in general terms that we've all worked with students who would have the sort of, bandwidth and determination and energy to find sources that are known to exist that they can't locate. And certainly as librarians, we take those challenges, we take up those challenges all the time. But I think that the high convenience option of Google Scholar really removes barriers to information in a way that improves student outcomes, improves the quality of student research experiences in a way that's really empowering for students. The other notable thing about Google Scholar to point out next would be that it treats, again, I said this earlier, it treats publications from scholarly and professional journals as its own sort of independent corpus. So really, it makes it much easier to find information that would be otherwise elusive or hard to discover. The other thing that really strikes me about Google Scholar, and you'll see this when we run some searches in just a bit in sort of the how-to hands-on portion of this presentation, is that Google Scholar is pulling information from prestigious academic journals, peer-reviewed journals. It's pulling information from content that we as a college, or for those of you attending or viewing, that you would have, through your own respective institutions that are licensed. So, like commercially licensed databases. And then it also pulls in a lot of material that would be, considered, harder to find, conference proceedings, and really from academic repositories. So on the one hand, in terms of academic repositories, certainly you find a lot of, duplicative articles, and by duplicative just meaning, they exist in commercially licensed databases, but then also they appear archived in scholarly, or academic repositories. But a lot of the academic repositories that you come across in Google Scholar is actually undergraduate research as well. So I want to just point that out for a couple of reasons. I think on the one hand, especially for those of us who worked on or are familiar with the Humanities Edge program, and I know that our colleagues from FIU, have also been involved in this, and certainly at Miami-Dade College, a lot of us have been heavily involved with the Humanities Edge grant now, going back to the summer. And, a lot of institutions, and the goal for many of us is to help archive, help institutions archive undergraduate research. And what I will say to that is, in terms of sort of the themes for this tutor symposium, when students come across research that's been produced by undergraduates, and they see those results alongside of professors and materials that are published in very prestigious journals, and when these results are all sort of showing up in the same search results, I think it has a very powerful effect to show the value placed on information from a variety of sources. And just seeing all of it in that same context, I think really elevates the significance and importance of, among other things, undergraduate research. So Google Scholar to me is really a powerful tool, not just in terms of its accommodating search and giving users the ability to locate information that would otherwise be hard to locate and retrieve, but also to sort of elevate and value information by conflating it in ways that typically an information searcher wouldn't come across. So also in terms of Google Scholar, for a significant slice of the population, it's part of the everyday experience, which is something we've already kind of covered. So in terms of its use cases, many of these we've already sort of touched upon. I think for any of us who work with students who are tutors or faculty, and in some cases both, I think one use case for Google Scholar would be locating information for ourselves that we would then in turn use to assist students. That would be certainly one use case. Another use case would be to show students directly how to locate information using Google Scholar. And then I think yet another use case would be to complement the resources that we have at our own home institution, i.e. the library catalog and databases directly, because as I'll show you in just a little bit, Google Scholar for the most part allows us to search virtually all of the resources we have access to through our own college, but then adds additional search results to that. So you're searching across even more content. So it's good for all of these things. And the other really great thing about Google Scholar, I think, is that it has just so many value-added features. Other benefits of Google Scholar besides value-added features, which I'll show you, including citation tools, which can be very useful. It also has the ability for the user to locate similar results, index similar results in a way that's very effortless. And it just tends to produce very high quality search results with minimal effort, with intuitive input. And then the other, I think, standout benefit of Google Scholar is just the ability for the user to run either a very basic search, and oftentimes or usually find what they're looking for, or if they're looking for something hyper specific, it's such an easy but powerful search interface that you have the ability to really zero in on a very granular level for something that you're looking for. And so for a lot of the tough cases, I call them, where students are doing a paper on something that's very focused, very narrowly framed, to the extent that they're just getting too many false hits or just finding stuff that's not directly on point, Google Scholar oftentimes is really what unlocks the information that students are looking for in order to be successful with a particular assignment or research inquiry. So how to use Google Scholar. This is going to be now, I think, the part of the exercise that is more sort of free flowing. I just want to go ahead and go into Google Scholar here and run some actual searches and show you some real examples of searches that I have run in different settings. And my hope is that they're broad enough in their coverage and subject matter that they relate to the sort of work that you do as students. But at any rate, I think these are all going to be examples that I think you'll be able to sort of duplicate for your own purposes very easily. So this is what the main screen of Google Scholar looks like. You access Google Scholar by either just entering this URL, or frankly, if you just Google, if you just Google Google Scholar, it comes right up. It's unsurprisingly the first search result every time. All right. When you go to Google Scholar, you want to go ahead and click on the hamburger icon or expander icon. And when you do that, the next thing to do, which is very important, is click next to the gear icon, Settings. And after you do that, you have an option to select Library Links. And this is really an important step. Google Scholar works without doing this. But when you click Library Links, you would then have an opportunity to type in the name of your institution. So most of us are from Miami-Dade College, and you would just type in, Miami-Dade College, right? And it pops right up, as you can see. But if you're at FIU, you can type in Florida International University, University of Miami, the example given here, Harvard. Really, every academic institution pops right up. Once you do that, you just make sure that you've checked the boxes after it comes back and hit Save. And once you have done that, Google Scholar has been optimized for your particular library. So when you get results back, you're going to be coming across direct access to materials in your library that have to be password authenticated, but nevertheless show up as search results, as if you were basically searching in your own academic catalog effectively, together with everything else that Google Scholar pulls up. So it's super convenient and very comprehensive in its scope. After you've done all of these things, what I recommend next is that you click again on the hamburger icon, and then go ahead and select a search for the advanced search. So I'll show you this in just a second, but you're going to have an option when you click on the hamburger icon to call up advanced search. And this is the template that you then get access to. And that's the one that we're going to be working with here in just a minute. So let me go ahead and pull up I'm going to go ahead now and pull up Google. And actually, let me just see here. All right, 1 second. All right. So you go ahead and type in Google Scholar. Very, very easy, very simple. And this is, again, what it looks like. I go up here to the hamburger icon, settings, library links. I'm going to go ahead and type in Miami-Dade College, run the search. It shows up, save. All right, that's done. Simple. Now I go back up here to the hamburger icon, and I'm going to go ahead and pull up advanced search. You certainly don't have to use advanced search, but I find this actually to be the easiest way to use Google Scholar because, again, it gives you ultimate flexibility to enter even a very granular search. Now, at this point, I'm going to run some searches that will incorporate, I'm going to start off by running a couple of just sort of general searches. And then I want to tie in the OER piece that I mentioned at the outset as something that I think really works hand in hand with Google Scholar in a very powerful and unique way. So let's say that you are helping a student who's writing a paper talking about the Electoral College. And, you know, they have information about the Electoral College from, let's say, a textbook, or their professor has given them articles about the Electoral College. Or they've just found some, you know, general articles in our databases that would help them understand this issue and write about it. But they are trying to do, you know, some research on something, you know, much more specific than that. So as an example, you know, these are fields that basically speak for themselves, or variations of the same Boolean search builders that we find in other databases. So the exact phrase, I'm just going to go ahead here and type in Electoral College, and that's going to be a required phrase for this search. Here, for all of the words, I'm going to go ahead and type in Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Trump. So here, let's say that a student is going to be writing about the Electoral College, whether it's a good system, how it works, it's a bad system, how it has helped shape the outcome of various elections. And as you can see from this search field, the student is writing, in this case, about recent elections, or comparatively recent elections. They would want to make sure that all of these terms are represented. Now, this really goes to the highly customization, the highly customizable part. Let's say that the student wants to write specifically about how there's variation in Electoral College influence on the outcome of elections based on the type of states that are sending that are deciding on electoral votes. So they might be able to literally enter a search like this. So fly over Midwest. And also here, I'm going to put in red states. And this is actually based on a search that I helped somebody with. So this is a little bit of, this is sort of a variation on a search where they were looking just for very specific information about the Electoral College. So I came up with the idea for the term flyover because, you know, this again would be a way of identifying a certain type of analysis, even if the term might be viewed as pejorative or not, but you know, merely descriptive way. Without weighing in on that, I do think that articles, you know, with the term flyover and Electoral College would at least have a particular point of view and analysis to share. Midwest would be a little bit more, I think, merely descriptive, and then red states is, I think, sort of a combination of both those ideas. So potentially, so here is an example of this search, and as you can see, this is going to be a very specific search, right? And then the quotation marks surrounding red states, this is simply to basically treat this as a single search input. So anytime you put a phrase in quotation marks in Google, Google will treat that as a single search input. So Electoral College basically is going to get quotation marks automatically because you're doing exact phrase search. So when you run the search, here's what comes back. And you can see, I think, just from this list, that these are going to be highly useful, highly relevant search results for a student who is focused on something as specific as how the Electoral College has shaped recent elections. When you do see the institution, so here for Miami-Dade College, you can see this article is available through MDC databases. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And then at this point, it will take me into Miami-Dade College's own databases. And if you haven't already authenticated yourself as a user during the same research session, then you'll get the prompt to do that. So here's what the article looks like, and at this point, obviously, the student is well on their way to learning more about their topic and possibly having a source that they can go ahead and use. For many of these sources, there will be links not to a particular database that your college has or that the student has access to as a student, but just literally hosted by various digital repositories. So here's an example of a UNLV academic repository. This is a source that appears not to have been in any of the Miami-Dade College resources, but that a student might still find useful. The other really great thing about Google Scholar, and I've talked about this as being a very easy to use tool, is if a student finds something or you find something that's relevant, you can always go to related articles and pull up other articles that have been indexed as being relevant to your topic. So clicking on related articles is it's a very powerful tool that can very easily be leveraged. You can also, of course, see other articles that have cited it. There is a citation tool. It works, I think, best for APA. The MLA citations, I believe, are still in most cases, or the majority of cases, to the older version of MLA. And in some cases, these citations require a little bit of modification, but for the most part, it's very easy to make those adjustments. The majority of the work is already done. And then you can also use the citation management tools, which is another wonderful value-added feature of Google Scholar. So that would be an example of one search. And the use case here is just something very, very narrowly focused. Let's say that you are interested specifically in only the term flyover. You have to find an article that uses the term flyover. We can just go ahead and elevate that. We could do it a couple ways. We could just eliminate everything else down here, but flyover, or just add it up here. What if you wanted something talking about flyover specifically? That I think would be a very powerful search term to pull up a particular type of analysis. And so here, you get right away something talking about American populism. It's the first result. And you'll find that if you do a control F for populism, this is probably going to be a highly relevant search result for somebody who is analyzing the Electoral College from a very specific point of view about how it shapes elections. And I think that was a very popular topic in the past year or so. Another example of a highly specific search based on assignments that I've worked with. Let's say a student in ENC 1102 is working on a paper, and you'll see here, I'm going to do Terminator, toxic masculinity in quotes, phrase Fight Club, and then comics, movies, novels. So if a student were writing on a topic involving toxic masculinity, they wanted to bring in Fight Club, the novel, the film, or both, Terminator, and then they want to talk about comics, novels, and movies, this would be a way of finding some great stuff. And here, this is like 4 results back, but it would be highly relevant for a student who is working on something as highly focused as that. Next, I just want to show you another tool. So this is where we get into the OER piece. So this is not, a presentation on OER, but for those of you who work with OER or who are familiar with it, open educational resources frequently, most often, I would feel comfortable saying most of the time, are accompanied by a Creative Commons license. And so these are all of the licenses that are the CC or Creative Commons licenses. And this would, from a top level perspective, give you the ability, or the user the ability, to do various things with them without requiring specific permission, in the sense, well, the permission's already been given. So to put another way, you don't have to write or seek permission to, in most cases, copy, or in many cases, remix or create derivatives. These are all permissions that have been given by the copyright holder. So if you see in all of these different licenses, and I would encourage those of you who are not familiar with Creative Commons to check out this website. It's pretty amazing. But all of these licenses, on the one hand, provide different permissions, but they all have a requirement of attribution. Literally, these licenses all have as a component or restriction or limitation the requirement of attribution. So it's sort of a magic word in the Creative Commons space. So when you are doing a search in Google Scholar and you want specifically to find a Creative Commons licensed source, here is a little sort of technique that I think is very effective. You type in here Creative Commons as an exact phrase. You require attribution as a search term because ostensibly every Creative Commons licensed material is going to have the word attribution in the document, referring to the particular Creative Commons license that is attached to it. In this case, I'm going to type in, public speaking in quotation marks because I want this to be a single search input. I'm going to type in the word anxiety. So here I'm looking for a Creative Commons licensed resource that has the phrase public speaking in quotation marks. So in other words, as an exact phrase combined, the term anxiety as a required search input. And then I'm going to put here gestures, eye contact, tone. But then I'm going to actually make it even specific. I'm going to go back up here to the required input term, and I'm going to type in quotation marks, scrutiny fear. So let's say that I am teaching a course or working with a student, and I want to find a resource, Creative Commons licensed, and that would give me the ability to reproduce it, for example, potentially even make a derivative, and many other things that I ordinarily would not be able to do with a source. And I'm looking for something to help a student who has a fear of public speaking. This is, a very typical or commonly encountered use case. So just sort of by way of review, attribution here and Creative Commons here is my way of locating a CC licensed or open educational resource, right? Public speaking, a required input for my search, the term anxiety, and I am requiring the phrase scrutiny fear because in this particular use case, I believe that I will find something of the most value to a student if it actually addresses this particular concept. So this is a very specific thing that I'm looking for. Now, when I go ahead and run the search, you actually will get some, great stuff back pretty quickly. So speaking with confidence as one of the things that comes up, just to sort of come up with this, if we go and run a little search, Control F, and I put here Creative Commons, you can see that this is the license that that has been assigned to this particular topic. So this is a Creative Commons license, and then this is the resource here. So that's just another example of how Google Scholar finds something, like in this case that was highly specific. It turns out was not actually not in one of our databases, but was nonetheless very, very useful and highly relevant. So on that note, I just actually, let me go ahead, and I have a couple of additional slides to share again. I think I actually just had cut off my my screen sharing inadvertently. Okay, here we go. All right, so on that note, Google and OER, we already covered rather. And so basically, I just wanted to say that if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or be of any assistance in that way as well. Again, not only for questions regarding Google Scholar, but also advanced Google search, something that we haven't really had a chance to talk about yet, but it basically just is a very similar way of engaging Google to find similar types of resources. So thanks very much for stopping by, for joining us today for this presentation. I appreciate it very much. And if any of you have any questions, I'll look forward to helping you out. Thanks so much. Does anyone have any questions now?
Thanks, Mike. Everyone, I'm going to type in the link.
All right, great. Well, thanks again.
Thank you so
thanks
much,
again,
Mike.
Charlie. Appreciate that very much. And thanks again, everybody. And I just wanted to say I hope everybody enjoys the rest of your day and has a great holiday and Happy New Year.